The Dark Tournament arc is considered to be one of the greatest tournament arcs in all of Shonen. Many Yu Yu Hakusho fans say that this is the peak of the entire series, and why they were so invested in the story in the first place. In the last video, we started at the very beginning of the Spirit Detective Saga to discover what exactly makes Yu Yu Hakusho so special, but the previous arcs were just the foundation. The Dark Tournament arc is really the meat of the story and contains the moments that define the entire series. So without further delay, let's get straight into dissecting one of Shonen's greatest arcs, the Dark Tournament. At the end of the last arc, Yusuke runs into the demon Toguro again, and he and his friends are forced to join the Dark Tournament. While having the protagonist join the tournament because of threats to their friends and family is high stakes on paper, there's no real personal motivations or objectives for the main character to fight, except for their survival. Our four main characters arrive much more powerful after 2 months of training, as we see them dispatch scores of low-ranked demons during their preliminary matches. The fifth member of the team is a masked fighter that is quite obviously Genkai in disguise, but the fact that the story is still playing up the mystery, while even Kuwabara notices it looks like Genkai, makes you second guess a little bit. The tournament pits teams of 5 demons against each other, including the human guest team, and is being funded and run by humans, which continues the running theme of the last arc of humans being just as bad as demons in some cases. The first round is against Team Rokuyukai, meaning the 6 wandering specters, and while being demons, they look and act identical to humans. And it's not just them. Kurama has a human body and the Toguros were formerly human, so it makes sense for them to look human-like. But characters like Hiei, Chu, Rinku, and a lot of the other demons we see in this tournament look much more human-like than even the demon spectators. Maybe these guys look more human than the others because they took a human form to enter human societies, or maybe Togashi just didn't care too much when designing them. Rinku, who pretty much just looks like a little kid, thrashes Kuwabara and beats him by ring out. Now because of the stakes of the tournament, we know that Team Urameshi can't afford to lose, but since it's a 5v5, it allows there to be losses along the way, while still having to progress in the tournament. Kurama is up next and he fights the dirtiest fighter in the entire tournament, Roto. Roto has a button which would alert his demon brother to kill Kurama's mother if he fights back. I don't even know how this is allowed because the girl already threatened Team Urameshi to fight, so if they got eliminated early from some other threat, that would really be anticlimactic. But it's possible that he was just lying because there's no real way for Kurama to actually check. But he played it safe and went along with it. And here we see Kurama staring down Roto coldly as he's beaten down, and he uses this time to plant his trap. Kurama had placed a seed of an immobilizing plant onto Roto's body and exploded it, killing him. This fight shows both the human side of him, Minamoto who cares deeply about his mother, but at the same time his cold, calculating Yoko side. Kurama's plant abilities do seem convenient for whatever situation arises, but I think nature abilities represents the beautiful life-giving, yet cold and life-taking side of Kurama's character. Next up is Hiei vs Zeru, and after a quick scuffle, Zeru hits Hiei with his demonic fire, but Hiei returns with his iconic Dragon of the Darkness flame. This is one of the strongest attacks we see in the entire tournament, and it completely incinerates Zeru. It's complete overkill, and it's a wonder why Hiei goes for it in his first fight, considering it almost completely destroys his arm. But instead of having Hiei gaining new abilities or building up his power slowly and progressively throughout the tournament, Togashi shows it to us up front all at once in the beginning of the tournament, and Hiei's journey is to reel in and control this ginormous dark flame he has. And at this point forward, Hiei is known more as a fire demon as opposed to the eye demon he was before. Chu from Team Rokuyukai kills his teammates to be up next, and Yusuke finally wakes up after being asleep for the entire tournament, and in shonen protagonist fashion, he takes the final fight, which is Chu versus Yusuke. This is an incredibly fun match to watch due to these two characters' distinct personalities. In the manga, the paneling and the choreography of the fights, along with the art, isn't anywhere near as good as Togashi would be with Hunter x Hunter, and it doesn't help with how much the sound effects cover up the art, but I honestly prefer the earlier rounds of the Dark Tournament in the manga over the anime because of its pacing. The characters are more compelling in the manga because they don't overstay their welcome. But the dialogue in the dub was much better though, including the goofy accents. The fight ends with Yusuke and Chu trading blows on the edge of knives, neither one giving an inch, with Yusuke ending it with a headbutt. This early on there's not much character development going on with Yusuke as there is with Hiei and Kurama, but this first match sets the stage for the development of these characters as they progress in the tournament. Team Urameshi progresses to the next round in the Dark Tournament, and we get these intermission between the matches, which is really necessary to prevent tournament fatigue. Dragon Ball's tournament got away with it since the tournament arcs were really short, but the Dark Tournament has multiple fights within each match, which can get real tiring real quick. So these intermissions help prevent arc fatigue by breaking up the arc while also allowing us to focus on characters outside of a fighting context, as we see Hiei recovering from his Dragon of the Darkness flame before he and Kurama get ambushed by members of Team Ichigaki. Togashi shakes things up this match by having it be a battle royale between the 3 remaining Ichigaki members versus the 3 Team Urameshi members. This gives Team Ichigaki the advantage in the teamwork department because they are humans who are all students of the same master, what they allowed themselves to be experimented on by Dr. Ichigaki in exchange for killing their master. This match was published around the same time that Cell was introduced, smack dab in the middle of the Android arc of Dragon Ball, so I wouldn't be surprised if Dr. Ichigaki was inspired by Dr. Gero. Anyways, the masked fighter uses some sort of exotic magic spell to kill off the parasites in the Dr. Ichigaki team members while sparing the hosts, which is a pretty lame conclusion to a fight in my opinion. Usually one of a tournament arc's greatest strength is to introduce characters and expand the cast of the series in general, but we don't see any more of these guys again, which is wasted potential since this arc is all about saving these possessed fighters that are actually good people and potential allies, but these guys weren't very memorable or interesting characters anyways, unlike the next group of opponents that Team Urameshi has to face. Team Masho. Immediately after their fight with Team Ichigaki, Team Urameshi are scheduled to fight Team Masho, and on top of that, Hiei and the masked fighter have been restricted from fighting, which really shows how much the tournament committee rigged the tournament against Team Urameshi. Team Masho is a team of shinobi that worked in the darkness of the demon world. They joined the dark tournament in order to gain light, which to them means a place of their own. Their wish if they win the tournament is to own Hangneck Island, the island that the tournament takes place on. Team Masho is immediately more interesting than the previous teams to me because they actually have motivations and goals as an organization and are willing to sacrifice themselves for the group, as we see in the first match. In the first fight, Kurama fights Gamma, who uses war paint to boost his power and restrict his opponent, which is honestly a sick fighting style, but in the end, Kurama outsmarts and outclasses him. But Kurama uses his dying breath in order to secure his teammate's victory in the next match by using his blood paint to bind Kurama. Kurama then fights Toya, the Ice Master, but ends up winning yet again by using a plant that uses the aura from inside of his body. Kurama is portrayed as a strategist out of Team Urameshi, and he does use strategy to win in-universe, but from a storytelling perspective, a lot of Kurama's wins are just by using plants that we've never heard of, which is extremely convenient for the situation he's in. It would be a lot more satisfying and would portray his smarts a lot more if he just used a limited amount of plants with known abilities to win. But instead he just has an infinite trick hat full of plants. With the fatigue, Kurama is left vulnerable in his next match against Bakuken, and he gets absolutely brutalized, and Yusuke has to step in his place and destroys Bakuken with rage, which leads to the final fight between the two team captains, Yusuke and Jin. Jin is surprisingly lighthearted and free-spirited compared to the other shinobi, which reflects in his ability of wind control, which allows him to fly around the entire arena. So similarly to Chu, we get a much more lighthearted, yet still intense and competitive fight. Jin really doesn't fit with the shadowy and ruthless tone of the other shinobi in his group, but if there's one character outside of Team Urameshi and Team Toguro that I would have liked to see more of, it would be Jin. He has one of my favorite abilities and fights in the entire series. Yusuke defeats Jin, but the Dark Tournament Committee rules it a draw, which leaves the final match between Kuwabara and Risho, which is a lot less grand than the previous fights. Kuwabara is the only one out of our main four who has yet to win a match in this entire arc yet, so it's about time he puts the entire weight of the team on his own shoulders and pushes through despite being severely injured. Kuwabara only finds enough strength to win by digging deep inside of himself, and well, he actually just gets it from seeing Yukina. Like I said in the last arc, Yu Yu Hakusho's female characters are great, but Togashi can't seem to find anything in the plot for them to do, especially in this arc, which is mainly battle focused. Besides Genkai, who's a combatant, and Koenma, who's a non-combatant, it's mostly the guys who take the center stage. I mean, I'm halfway through covering the entire arc, and I haven't even had to mention half the cast. In the anime, they actually removed Atsuko from this arc entirely, and didn't even affect the story at all. But the female characters in this series aren't boring or personality-less like in other shonen, but the most Togashi can do with them is relegate them to gag scenes in the margins between the big fights. But in these final stages of the tournament, the story focuses a lot more on the personal and emotional sides of these characters, which makes having the entire group together really necessary. Yusuke's golden egg from way back in the Ordeal arc finally hatches, and inside of it we get to see the monster that is supposed to represent his deepest self, but it turns out to be some stupid looking bird creature. The concept of poo was introduced in the beginning of the series to represent Yusuke's true personality. And in this arc, poo shows Yusuke's sincere emotions at their most vulnerable, without Yusuke's typical snarky comebacks to cover them up. This last section of the tournament heavily focuses on Yusuke and his development through the characters of both Toguro and Genkai. Genkai finally reveals herself as the masked fighter, which seems super obvious, but I honestly was just as unsure as Yusuke on my first watch through, especially when we saw her younger self. Genkai regains her youth and beauty for just a split second when she fires her spirit wave, which is honestly a pretty weird mechanic for that ability, but it does a good job of illustrating how far past her prime Genkai is. It also illustrates the themes of this arc. The aging Genkai decides to pass her powers down to Yusuke on the condition that he kills her. Yusuke thinks this through for a while, but is unable to go through with it, which is exactly what Genkai wanted to hear. This was a test to see if her pupil is someone who would actually consider killing her, but not too easily. What it really was a test of Yusuke's emotionality, showing us the virtuous mean between too much uncontrolled emotion and a cold lack of emotion. This level of sincere emotional control shows just how far Yusuke has developed and how far he came from chapter 1, and allows him to inherit Genkai's power. Meanwhile, Hiei, Kurama, and Kuwabara are left to face Team Urotagi alone. Each member of Team Urotagi are based on Japanese folktale characters, but reversed. Hiei takes on Ma Kintaro first, which is an evil version of the legend of Kintaro, and Ma Kintaro gets immediately stomped. And at this point, it feels like Togashi doesn't really feel like drawing 5 different battles, so he just makes one fighter character on each team get completely stomped. Hiei then takes on Kuro Momotaro, which is a dark version of the legend of Momotaro, and he has the ability to adapt his physiology to any attack when he eats his special dumplings. Hiei wins again, this time using the hilt of his blade to create a dark flame spirit sword, similar to Kuwabara's. It honestly always kind of annoyed me that both Hiei and Kuwabara, who are complete opposites, both have sword abilities. Togashi should have just allowed Hiei to be the full-on swordsman of the group. It fits him way better and his spirit sword is a lot cooler than Kuwabara's. And he should have just gave Kuwabara another weapon, like a club or a baseball bat. I think that would have fit his blunt meathead personality a lot better than a sword would. Next, Kurama fights Reverse Urashima of the Urashima Taro fairy tale. What is interesting is that in this fight, Urashima uses Kurama's sympathy to catch him off guard. Then he uses his magic box to reverse the age of Kurama, but unintentionally and ironically reverse him to the cold and unsympathetic Yoko Kurama. Yoko Kurama being a regression of Kurama is very interesting in multiple ways. This arc is all about our main character's growth, and Kurama's power-up isn't actually a power-up, but simply regaining the power that he once had, which adds a much different progression than the other characters. The problem is that while Yoko is a progression in power, it really is a regression of Kurama as a person. Right now, Yoko has the power that Kurama needs, but Minamoto is the person that he wants to be. But this conflict within Kurama is one that goes on for the remainder of the series. Urashima is then killed by Shishi Wakamaru and revealed to be a fraud, ending Kurama's match. Kuwabara then picks a fight with Shishi Wakamaru in the next match, but gets absolutely no diff. So the unmasked Genkai has to step up in his place. And what's interesting is the one that explains Genkai is the masked fighter and should be allowed to stay in the tournament is Toguro. You can only imagine what he must have been feeling seeing Genkai's former strength and beauty flicker for only an instant before fading away. What we see in Genkai's fight with Shishi Wakamaru and Suzaku is exactly what Toguro says. Genkai has access to the skills and experience that she acquired throughout her life, but her raw strength and aura has mostly faded. The remainder of the strength that it takes to win it all, and the only chance that Team Urameshi has, lies within Yusuke. Toguro confronts Genkai in a secluded area, and this dialogue that we get and most of the interactions between these two characters are some of the best in the entire series and are central to the story of this arc. There's honestly too much to unpack between Toguro and Genkai here, so they're going to need their very own dissection video. But in short, the relationship between Toguro and Genkai is one of my favorite villain and mentor relationships I've seen. The decision to not make their dynamic be that of a teacher and student would make them former lovers, whom after a traumatic experience of a demon attack, split apart due to their philosophical differences and going down 2 distinct paths. Genkai decides to accept her humanity and ages and weakens over time, while Toguro rejects his humanity and transforms into a demon so that his youth and strength will never wane. And now, even years later, we see that Genkai has come to accept her life and how things went with Toguro, while he hasn't progressed a bit and is the one who is still resentful at the decision that Genkai made. It all shows in the way that Toguro insults Genkai, barely acknowledging her as the same person he once knew, Toguro treats this fight as if he's just taking out the trash. To him, the elderly Genkai that he sees before him is just a haggard shell of her former self. The real Genkai is already dead to him, so he ruthlessly murders her. The death of the mentor is a crucial part of the hero's journey. It's expected of every series that the wise old master will die at the hand of the villain. It signifies the time for the hero to let go of the safe world and take on the journey on his own, without requiring help from his mentor. But most importantly and relevant in this story, it's the mentor leaving their will in the hands of the hero. And that's what Toguro sees, and he's already accepted that fact. All of Genkai's essence now resides within Yusuke. Now we've reached the final round of the Dark Tournament, the climax of the story. Early in the tournament, we got a scene of Toguro fighting on behalf of his team alone, which kept his team mysterious and re-established his strength to the reader, since we've already seen it. Now we're getting the inverse, with Toguro missing for his semifinals match, and his teammates being the ones introduced and showcasing their strength. And all 5 of Team Toguro's team members foil their counterparts in Team Urameshi. In the first match, we have the brooding Karasu versus Kurama. Karasu works as a great foil to Kurama, because he appears to be a superior version of him. While they share the same calmness, subtlety, and intelligence in their personality and fighting style, what makes Karasu more dangerous is that his explosion powers are intrinsically more lethal than Kurama's plants, which makes him seem like an insurmountable obstacle. Now the actual fight, while being the hardest and most tense fight that Kurama has had, still has some of the same problems that most of his fights do. Some of the plants that Kurama uses have been established throughout the tournament, but some, like the Humble plant summoned from the demon world, are brand new. I can mostly excuse this because it makes sense for Kurama to have brand new mysterious techniques in his Yoko form, and the real challenge that Kurama has to face in this arc is maintaining his Yoko form that he got using Suzuki's potion. On the other hand, the secret behind Karasu's abilities is he doesn't just create explosions, but he creates invisible bombs. Karasu initially dominates Kurama until he turns the table in his Yoko form, which really makes it feel like he's a completely different entity entirely. The match ends with Kurama using his plants to precisely pierce Karasu's weak spot in his chest, using the remainder of his aura along with Yoko's aura. So in essence, Kurama wins by using his human and demon forms in conjunction. While this fight doesn't morally challenge Kurama like the others in this tournament, it does complete his arc by having him integrating both sides of himself with his final blow. The next fight is the heavyweight Bui versus Hiei. If Kurama is the brains of the group, then Hiei would be the brawn. Hiei isn't physically imposing, but he fits as the powerhouse archetype in the 5-man band trope. Bui, on the other hand, while not being the strongest in his team, is the epitome of brawn and foils Hiei in this aspect. Both Hiei and Bui begin the fight by removing their restraints and unleashing their full powers. Bui takes off his armor and Hiei removes the seal bandages around his arm, revealing that he has finally learned to control the Dragon of the Darkness Flame. This fight, and Hiei's arc throughout the tournament, I think is the weakest out of our 4 main characters, because most of it is just making Hiei look cool without much substance. And on a purely battle-focused lens, this fight isn't as tense as the others. Hiei barely struggles with Bui, and the damage of the battle only shows up until after the fight. And character-wise, it would have been interesting if Hiei controlling the dragon coincided with him controlling himself personally, or another character arc similar to how Yoko was tied to Kurama's arc. Maybe that would be too similar, but having the 2 demons of the group go on similar arcs while the 2 humans do the same would be narratively symmetrical to me. But while all this fight does try to do is look cool, it does succeed in that overwhelmingly, especially the animation in the anime adaptation. The next fight is the sadistic Elder Toguro versus Kuwabara. Technically this is a rematch because these 2 have fought before in the previous arc, but in that arc, Elder was mostly like either a pet or a weapon to the heavily suppressed younger Toguro. But now we see that alone, he is much more cruel and deadly in his own way. His trickiest ability being the fact that he can contort his body to the point where it's almost impossible to get a critical hit in on him. Kuwabara usually has to fight the trickier opponents, probably to contrast how simple-minded he is, although the whole thing with him not knowing that Genkai was dead never made sense to me. I get that he's dumb, but his spiritual awareness allowed him to see the entirety of Team Ichigaki's backstory in his dream, so I don't know how he didn't notice that Genkai of all people had died. The fight between the number 2s of the group ends with Kuwabara squashing the Elder Toguro like a bug, as if it was just a warm-up match, leading up to the final match of Yusuke and Toguro. The sponsors of their respective teams, Sakyo and Koenma, bet their lives on the 2 fighters, making it the deciding match of the tournament. We also get to see Sakyo's backstory showing that he was always twisted and playful, and which was honestly unnecessary. There are two types of villains, ones that have sympathetic sides to them that are revealed in backstories, and ones that just represents the worst of humanities and needs no further reason to be evil. And Sakyo is definitely the latter. I really wish we got to see more of Sakyo and the underground bureaucratic side of the series, especially with the Dark Tournament Committee and the Black Blood Club. It's really weird to think that the author that wrote the Dark Tournament, one of the most iconic and conventional shonen arcs of all time, is the same author that's writing the Succession War arc in Hunter x Hunter that focuses on the political aspects first and neglects the battle shonen aspects. And this might be controversial, but I prefer Togashi's newer, denser, wordier writing style over the Dark Tournaments, and I'd love to see how the current Togashi would rewrite this arc if he had the time. But now we have the final matchup between Yusuke and the younger Toguro, and I'm not sure how much of this is due to the hype and the build-up or because of the actual choreography of the fight, but the beginning exchanges feel so grand and have you holding your breath, which is true for almost all greatly anticipated bouts in shonen. The fight also goes back and forth with who has the upper hand at any given time, which is a very shonen way to structure a battle. But I mean, Toguro's entire ability is also literally, this isn't even my final form. But it does fit his character because his ever-increasing power coincides with his loss of humanity. His base form is relatively human, but with every percentage that he powers up, he grows more contorted and monstrous. Yusuke's power-ups, on the other hand, are kinda BS, but satisfying at the same time, for the same reasons that I mentioned at the end of the last dissection video. Yusuke's first power-up of removing his spiritual cuffs that Genkai put on him technically isn't a power-up, but it functions the same way in the story as one. It does show how much more disciplined Genkai has made him, but it's mostly just plot to give the fight much more of a back and forth dynamic. Now, Pooh was an interesting concept to represent Yusuke's inner self, but now that he's hatched, he's pretty much just a plot device to protect Yusuke's friends from Toguro's aura that is massacring the entire crowd. And apparently he's also a telephone to the afterlife. Genkai's soul comes back to life through Pooh to give Yusuke a pep talk, and probably one of my least favorite things about this arc, she encourages Toguro to kill Kuwabara to motivate Yusuke. The way that this happens is so meta that it almost seems like a parody of shonen. It's like everyone already accepts that a shonen protagonist's friends dying equals a power-up, and it's taken for granted so much that it's treated like a dilemma and a sacrifice for Kuwabara to willingly get killed by Toguro to give Yusuke a power-up. The power-up doesn't rely on the rules of a power system that has been established, but that you understand the rules of shonen tropes, which I think really takes you out of the story. But while I think that Togashi failed at earning this power-up with the way that he wrote the power system, I think he succeeded spectacularly character-wise. Even with how much of a plot device this power-up is, most fans would not criticize it because of how well it works to pay off Yusuke's character and his arc since the beginning of the series. The question that I had set out to answer is what makes Yu Yu Hakusho so special, and the answer lies within this scene. It's not the plot or the world that is the most compelling about this series, but the characters, and specifically their emotional journeys that make this series memorable. From the first chapter, Yusuke has been characterized by his aggressive delinquent personality. But when he loses his body, we see that his constant fighting and snark are just coping mechanisms, and at his very core, he's harmless. And now, after the death of his friend, the true and sincere Yusuke has come out, which sounds kind of corny and too generic of a trope for anything meaningful to be said, but Yusuke's power-up is framed within Toguro's and Genkai's philosophical conflict. Every human has dreams and goals and a will to achieve those dreams, but as a human you are physically limited in power and time. Genkai chose to embrace that fact as an essential part of being human, and Toguro rejected his humanity to become a demon and to gain potentially unlimited power and time. His entire purpose for going down that road was because of the loss of his pupils, but if he had moved forward like Genkai and accepted his mortality, he could have grown old with her and trained Yusuke together as his new pupil. But now he stands as his enemy to try to prove the power that he sacrificed everything for. And that's what this final clash is, the power of connections channeled through Yusuke's spirit gun and the power of oneself channeled through Toguro's demon body. Toguro takes the full force of the spirit gun head on, and after, he acknowledges the power of friendship and he shatters. And with this, Yusuke wins the match and Team Urameshi wins the Dark Tournament. Compared to its contemporaries, this tournament was a long haul. The Tenkaichi Budokai tournaments were almost half of the original Dragon Ball, but were a trilogy of 3 different tournament arcs divided between more adventure-focused arcs. The Chunin exams were long and continuous, but were split up into several distinct phases, and most other tournament arcs in Shonen are much shorter and smaller in scale, similar to the Genkai tournament. But what we get through this long tournament that takes up a huge chunk of the series is having our characters progress personally as they progress in the tournament. This arc does everything that a Shonen tournament arc does best, except probably introducing new characters. The tournament having 5-man teams means it has a lot of new characters, but only a very few of them become barely relevant later on. And while we're on the negatives, I'm not a big fan of the resurrection of Genkai and the fake out death of Kuwabara. Like I said before, Kuwabara's death felt very artificial, and I would have preferred if Yusuke's emotional release power up was because of him finally accepting Genkai's death. The permanent death of the mentor is very important for the character to grow into themselves fully, and I would have liked if Yusuke would have grown maybe a bit more emotionally sincere and honest after the tournament. But most writers usually end up sacrificing character development in order to preserve a character's iconic personality. But in all, this arc is the shonen arc of shonen arcs, and gives everything that you'd expect, like the power of friendship but executed satisfyingly due to how well the characters are written. Togashi ends this arc with a bang, with Sakio destroying the Dark Tournament arena along with him, burying his ambitions of a portal between the human and demon worlds. But a certain someone is carrying on Sakio's dream, and that person will be the antagonist of the next arc. Next time we'll be dissecting the Chapter Black arc, but before that we'll be diving deep into the younger Toguro's character, who's an antagonist that definitely needs his own dissection video. If you found this dissection video interesting and are looking forward to more Yu Yu Hakusho arc and character dissections, or you are interested in a dissection of Hunter x Hunter or other anime and manga, then liking this video and subscribing would be the best way to support this video. This channel is still relatively small, so subscribing, liking, and commenting your thoughts go a long way.